When you read Titus Livius or Livy's History of Rome books, because this is a collection of many books, there are a few families that stand out, and the most interesting, or one of the most interesting things you learn from reading Livy's books, is that the Romans had this sense of family belonging, if I might call it so. Like, they so much valued being of a particular family, and the position a particular family held in society maintained for centuries. Like, for centuries, that family will carry their name in a particular way. And there are a few families that stand out, quite a number in fact. But I will say that one that stands out the most is the Claudian family. Now, the Claudian family ended up producing all the emperors that ruled the Roman Empire, not the Roman kingdom, because there is the Roman kingdom that starts with Romulus around 750s BCE, and Romulus is considered to be the first monarchy, and he was a king. And then there were like 6 other kings that came after him, including Numa Pompilius, Tullus Hostilius, and then the last one of those was a guy who went by the nickname Superbus. His father was a king, and then after he left, he died. Somebody else became the king, and then Superbus became the king, and he became the last king, and he was expelled with his family from Rome. And then after that, Rome became a republic, and that Rome became a republic around close to 500 BCE. And after Rome became a republic, then there are these families that emerged, and the Claudian family is one of those. Now, the Claudian family, the ancestor of the Claudian family, the first one to be in Rome, was a guy who went by the name Aulus Clausius. This guy was a Sabine, and Sabines were enemies of the Romans for a very long time. They used to go to war with the Romans for a very long time. Now, around 500 BCE, the Romans were fighting with the Sabines, and then the Sabines, as a tribe or a nation, had this meeting of their leaders who were to decide whether to continue fighting with the Romans or to surrender to the Romans and give up war and maybe sign some peace treaty with them. Then a disagreement emerged among the leaders of the Sabines. Some of them thought it was a good idea to talk to the Romans and then to form some form of friendship. And others thought they should fight until maybe they conquer the Romans. They thought maybe they would do that. Now, because of this difference in opinion among the Sabine leaders, some of these leaders who wanted peace with Rome went ahead and decided to go to Rome and try to talk to the Romans and try to form some alliance with them. And then the other leaders remained. Now, one of the leaders who went to Rome was Aulus Clausius. He is in fact the leader of this group that went to Rome. And when they reach Rome, they meet the consuls there. Then it was the consuls now in power after the king had just been expelled not long before then. And Aulus Clausius or Aulus Clausius are then welcomed to Rome with his entourage, and in fact they are accepted and given citizenship, and they become Romans, and they are considered one of the tribes of Rome, and this tribe is given the name of the Claudian tribe. Now, from that point, Aulus Clausius started calling himself Appius Claudius, or that's how he came to be known. He became Appius Claudius. Livy describes him as somebody who was already wealthy before he came to Rome. Seems like he was doing well for himself. And after coming to Rome, he continued to expand his empire, and he became very successful in whatever he was doing. But more importantly, he was appointed or maybe elected to be a senator, a member of the Senate. And remember, at this time, the Senate in Rome was like, it was hereditary. Once a family gets that seat, then that seat was now hereditary. Father gives to the son to the grandson, and so on and so on and so forth. So Appius Claudius becomes a senator. And because he's now a senator, his family become members of the patrician class. And in Rome, there were these two classes of citizens. In fact, there were three classes of citizens. There were the patricians, who were in fact families that had been privileged to get the seat of a seat in the Senate. And most of them had been appointed or nominated by Romulus initially, and then some of the kings that came after that did appoint more families. And then when Rome became a republic, the first consuls did appoint some more families. And now during this time, it's not so clear how Appius Claudius was appointed or elected to become a senator, but he became a senator anyways. So Appius Claudius is a senator, and very quickly it became obvious that he had so much dislike for the common people, the plebeians. He didn't like them, and he started playing his politics in such a way that he would always oppose anything that seemed like it was going to benefit the plebeians. And the plebeians, of course, didn't like him. And he did this. He continued playing these politics, and at some point he became so popular with the patricians because he was always opposing the plebeians, and he was elected to be a consul. So he becomes a consul, and then after that he retires and he dies. And his son comes after him, and the son becomes a consul as well. But Livy describes him as not to be a very capable kind of a leader. He tells us of a story of him going to war, and then his own soldiers refusing to follow his orders. And in fact, he loses the battle. I think it was a battle, and he comes back. He's very embarrassed. But he also became he became a huge opponent of the plebeians, especially they used to be called the tribunes of the people who were elected by the plebeians to defend them. So he also carried that in fact, the way Livy describes it, it was more of hatred than really opposing because of politics. It was a lot more to do with hatred. Now, this family continues to influence the politics of Rome for 1,000 years. But before we go to the end of it, there are a few very notable members of the Appius or the Claudian family who end up doing things that stand out. Could have been around 440s or 450s BCE, there was this movement, you can call it, or there was this decision of the Republic that they needed to make changes to the laws of the land. You can say, do some amendments or write a new constitution sort of thing. And they appointed like 5 commissioners who went to Athens to learn more about how the Athenians had made their laws, and in particular how to copy the laws that were written by this guy. I'm forgetting his name. He was called Solon. Solon is the name. To go and copy some of the laws that were written by Solon, the guy who was very much respected in Athens as a lawgiver. And they go to Athens and they copy these laws, and then they come back. They come back to Rome. And then when they arrive in Rome, then a decision is made that these laws are not, the new laws are not going to be legislated or to be written or to be voted while they had consuls in power. So they had to have a new set of leadership before that is done. And in fact, they appoint a group of 5 who are called the Decemvirs. And one of them was an Appius Claudius. He was a member of that family. And this guy was, I get the sense that either Livy hated this family so much and he decided to portray them in the most negative way possible, or this family was basically very greedy with power. It's either of the two, because this other Appius Claudius, he is appointed to be a decemvir, and then he tricks the republic into basically making him a king, basically almost a king. But then the people revolt, and then he ends up being put in jail, and then he takes on his life. he kills himself basically, and then so that was that character. But then there was this other Appius Claudius that came, we will say maybe 150 years later. Yeah, maybe, yeah, close to 150 or 100 years later, around the year 307 to 396, another Appius Claudius from the same family. Now, this guy is also, as I said, either Livy hated this family and decided to portray them in the most negative way, or this family was basically, all of them had this gene of greed for power. Now, Appius Claudius, this now Appius Claudius, around 307 to, he became a censor. And censors used to rule as pairs, just like consuls who used to rule as pairs. And the rule was, there was a rule we called the Aemilian law. This was passed by a dictator who was a guy who went by the name Aemilius. And it was that somebody will not stay in power for more than a year. So you consuls 1 year, censors 1 year, and then other people are elected, because he said these were very powerful seats, and it was not proper that people are just let to stay there for forever. So Appius Claudius is a censor, and then after when his term ended, he did something that nobody else had done, in fact, since the beginning of the Republic, because even before the Aemilian law was passed, the Romans generally, leaders were expected that once their term ended, which was usually a year or a few months for a dictator, then they would just leave. But Appius Claudius did not leave. And in fact, his 1 year term ended, and he stayed for several, I think another year. And even after the other censor had resigned, and it was expected that once the person you were elected along with resigns, then you had to resign. There was no other way to do it. You had to go with the person you were elected with. But Appius Claudius stayed in power, and in fact, Livy tells us something that one of the tribunes of the people told him in a speech, and he was kind of like reminding the people that this family has always been problematic. And he tells the following. This is what this tribune of the people went by the name of Publius Sempronius. Now, Publius Sempronius gives a speech, and in this speech he's attacking Appius Claudius for refusing to get out of power. And he says, "Tell me, Appius Claudius, in what manner would you have acted had you been a censor at the time when Caius Furius and Marcus Gagenius were censors?" And Appius insisted that the tribune's question was irrelevant to his case, for although the Aemilian law might bind those censors during whose magistracy it was passed, because the people made that law after they had become censors, and whatever order is the last passed by the people, that basically he was being like, yeah, there is that law or how things have been done, but it doesn't apply to me. And in fact, Sempronius went ahead to remind the Romans that this family was very not good to the Republic. This is what he tells the Romans. "Behold, Romans, the offspring of that Appius, who being created decemvir for 1 year, created himself for a second, and who during that, without being created even by himself or by any other, held on the fasces and the government, though a private individual, nor ceased to continue in office until the government itself, ill acquired, ill administered, and ill retained, overwhelmed him in ruin. This is the same family, Romans, whose violence and injustice you were compelled to banish yourself from your native city, and says on the sacred mount." This is when Livy describes the time when Romans left the city and went, the plebeians left the city and left, and only the patricians remained in the city as a protest. That happened very early on at the beginning of the Republic. So Sempronius kind of like reminds the Romans, a very long speech, He reminds the Romans about the bad things that or the evil things, or how the Claudian family has not been good to the Republic. He gives this long speech telling them how they hated the plebeians, how they've always tried to grab power, like now this Appius Claudius was doing. Anyways, as I said before, the Claudian family continued to have a lot of influence on the politics of the Roman Republic. And in fact, even they continued to have this power, or this influence, even after it became an empire. And in fact, as I've mentioned, they produced, although it's not the Claudian family as it now became the Julio-Claudian family, a combination of the Julio family and the Claudian family. And that family is the family that produced the five emperors that ruled. So five of the emperors that ruled over the Roman Empire. Sorry. Now, the very last member of the Claudian family to have some political office in Rome is recorded to have been someone who was a consul around the year 488 AD, even though at this time consuls were not the consuls that were there during the pure Republic. Remember, consuls were the power holders during the Republic, but at some point after, I would say after Julius Caesar became a dictator, and then Augustus, his nephew, became initially became like it was being a dictator, but then he quickly turned it and he became an emperor, and he ruled for several, I think, could be over a decade or something like that. And then his family, in fact, started ruling. Now, when the last Julio Claudia member held any political office, this was 488 AD, he was a consul, but consuls by then were just symbolic seats. Anyway, if you look at the year 488 and you look at the year that Attius Clausius came to Rome, which was around 500 BCE, that's 1,000 years. That's a very long time for one family to have some such amount of influence on a nation. So thank you for listening, and I request, or if you like what I cover in this channel, and I talk about stories that I pick in ancient texts that I read, feel free to subscribe. And if you have any question, or you have something you think I should have said, or you have something that came to your mind as you were listening to me, feel free to leave me a comment. Thank you. See you in the next video.